Yes, there are two. I'll explain that.
Okay.
So, those of you online, thank you for your patience. Those of you here, enjoy eating. If you want online, you can eat too.
You might have to share
It's
it.
fine. We're having food for the spirit and food for the belly. It's all good. Why don't we do the bracha for learning? Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu v'asok b'divrei Torah. As Rabbi David says, we're going to soak in Torah. Right. So, King David.
Yeah. There's no more of these? There's no more?
How many?
One in this.
Hi, here's more.
We'll share.
So the reason for two is what in the one from Sefaria, which has the Hebrew, also has, whenever the Hebrew is difficult, it has like a parenthesis piece that kind of we stumbled over last time. So I tried to edit that out, and that's the second piece, is just the English, editing out those kind of ellipses that are in there, if it's easier to follow. But they're both the same text. It's just one of them is a little cleaner in the English. So as we're beginning, I want you to think about something, not just for today, but where did the idea come in human history that everything can be one? That everything can be one, meaning that the world is not in various pieces, that there aren't various gods, but that everything can be seen as a unit, everything. Everything in the world, everything beyond the world, all as one. I think it's counterintuitive to human experience. Our experience is that we are separate from others, we distinguish between. And yet, there is a philosophy that was first written about 2,500 years ago by Heraclitus, the Greek writer, called monism. And monism, you may have studied it in school. Monism was the idea, in brief, I wrote down what Heraclitus said, from all things one, and from one all things. From all things one, and from one all things.
Repeat Hebrew.
Heraclitus is Greek.
Oh, Greek, I'm sorry. But you said monism?
Monism
Okay.
is what it's called, oneness. It affects everything is one and comes from one and is one. So that notion, because we don't know when the Torah was written down. We don't know when chapter 1, for instance, of Genesis actually got written down. Now, if you believe that God gave it, okay, so then it came out before Heraclitus, because Heraclitus is 2,500 years ago, about the 5th century BCE. Whereas the Torah, if we think of it as Moshe gets the Torah, Torah is written at least 3,000 to 3,500 years ago, somewhere in there. So if God didn't write it, then it's possible that chapter 1 of Genesis was influenced by this philosophy. Heraclitus didn't invent it. It already existed in part in the Egyptian society. Someone at some point had this insight of oneness, which was different than what most religion presented itself as, right? Even to this day, Christianity presents itself as three as one. So there is a oneness, but there's also a bifurcation, right? And we see that in Hinduism, we still see it in early parts of Judaism, where we see Satan, the notion of God, and discussing Job with Satan, right? Whoever Satan is. We see it with the fallen angels in Christianity. But monism clearly is where Judaism kind of landed. As a group, as a whole, we landed there. And the reason I bring it up two reasons. One, in today's scientific world, quantum mechanics, that is the theory of quantum mechanics. Everything is one. There is no separation. Everything is both energy and particle, waves and particles, they are all one. And there is no separation. And that is where science has been moving in the last at least 100 years. And if you read anything about quantum mechanics and quantum gravity, that's what you're reading about. They're validating, and it is one of the most validated scientific theories, because your smartphone, your computer, everything we have operates on that theory. And it works, right? I mean, most of the time it works. GPS works. So it works because of this theory. Well, this theory is monism, scientifically validated. And it is what Judaism's instinct is. And it's why Christianity had to adapt itself, because its story of Jesus presented a bifurcation of God. God was not one. But the mystery, as they presented it, is that, yes, it is God as one in three different forms. And that was their way of trying to blend it. Islam doesn't have that problem. For Islam, it is monism. Everything is one, right? And they, again, came many centuries after Judaism. And we don't know where it started or how it happened. The reason I bring it up is because David is one of the symbols of one in our tradition, right? The center of all of life is Jerusalem, city of David. David is the model for the Mashiach, who will bring the oneness to all. That theory of Judaism that comes out of the messianic concept, that there will be a oneness and all humanity will come to God and understand this oneness. And David is that symbol as a human being. Not Abraham, because Abraham actually divided the world into the Arabic peoples and the Jewish people, Hebrew peoples. But it is David that is seen as that kind of one who will reunite all of humanity, if you will. So, as we're looking at David, we're looking at the human being that is presented in the Bible. And last time we got to the point where Samuel was about to anoint David. So we're going to look at chapter 16 again at the end. Could Jeff put it up?
You want the English one or Hebrew?
For me, English Hebrew is best. But you guys can read from the other one when we get to it. So let's take, toward the end of it, where it is chapter 16, verse, where are we?
Page numbers.
No, there are no page numbers. Do you?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, page 2.
Are they doing one or are they?
Yeah, let's do page 2, which is chapter 16, verse 12. Yeah, and let's record. Thank you. We'll wait for Jeff to get it up on the page. Yeah, down to 12. So, there you are. Okay. Who would like to read?
So they sent and brought him. He was ruddy-cheeked, bright-eyed, and handsome. And the Lord said, "Rise and anoint him, for this is the one." Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord gripped David from that day on. Samuel then set out for Ramah.
Okay, so who now knows that David is the anointed one?
His family.
It says his brothers. It doesn't even say his father Jesse. Now we can assume Jesse must be there because he's the one that brought the brothers. So we could say that the family knew, but nobody else knows. And apparently nobody finds out. Now, it would have been dangerous for Samuel had Saul found out, right? Because we know something about Saul. We know that he's not the most stable person, and he is a violent person. And we're going to see that played out even more against David. But clearly, it's a secret that the family keeps, and whether it will mean something will only matter over time. It will only be a prophecy that will take place if David becomes king. And we now, of course, know he does. They don't know that. The brothers don't know it. And what we're going to be encountering as we read through the story is there are more than one stories about David that get woven together that seem to bring David for the first time. And without the previous knowledge, the brothers won't even have previous knowledge of his anointing. So let's move on in the text, meaning that this is probably a mosaic or a pastiche of different stories of David that got put together at some point. Okay.
Yeah. Now the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord began to terrify him. Saul's courtiers said to him, "An evil spirit of God is terrifying you. Let our Lord give the order, and the courtiers in attendance on you will look for someone who is skilled at playing the lyre. Whenever the evil spirit of God comes over you, he will play it, and you will feel better." So Saul said to his courtiers, "Find me someone who can play well and bring him to me." One of the attendants spoke up. "I have observed the son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, who is skilled in music. He is a stalwart fellow and a warrior, sensible in speech and handsome in appearance, and the Lord is with him."
So wait a second here.
He's a warrior.
Right. David was a shepherd in the last story, the one we just read, right? He's out tending sheep. Here, he's well known. Somebody at court knows him. Stalwart. He's stalwart. He's still handsome. That stays the same. But he's a warrior, and they know that he's a musician. They know a lot about David. Whoever at court seems to know a lot about David. Whereas our previous story, nobody knew anything about David. Samuel didn't even know about David. He had to be led there by God, and then he had to go through all the brothers until he realized that David was the one. So here we have two stories of introducing David to us, and they are obviously different and came from different traditions. So let's see, here it's David the musician that is needed in court, not the warrior. Okay.
Whereupon Saul sent messengers to Jesse to say, "Send me your son David, who is with the flock." Jesse took an ass, bread, a skin of wine, and a kid, and sent them to Saul by his son David.
So why was that line in there that David was with the flock? Because the person at court seemed to know him as a warrior and a musician and well known. And then we have this interjection here about he's in the flock. I would argue that's the editor or redactor later saying, wait, we just had a story about him being at the flock. And we need some reference to that flock in order for people not to say, what's going on here? You know, these two stories are similar. They could have happened together in separate times, right? So you put a little line in there saying, you know, bring your kid from the flock to the court. Okay.
So David came to Saul and entered his service. Saul took a strong liking to him and made him one of his arms bearers.
Okay, now his arms bearers, meaning now he's not only at court, he's one of the favorites of the king, and he hangs around the king. He holds onto his sword or his shield. They didn't walk around fully armed. I mean, they only put on their armor when they went to battle. It was very cumbersome, the armor that they had. But he had arms bearers who were honorary positions, who guarded his shield, guarded his sword, guarded the rest of the outfits that he would have worn into battle, right? And Saul was a big guy. We know that. He was head and shoulders above everyone. That's how Samuel, from the last reading, that's how Samuel identified him. So his armor was substantial. And his sword would have been a large sword. And David is not large. We know that. He's kind of average in height. Okay.
Saul sent word to Jesse, "Let David remain in my service, for I am pleased with him." Whenever the evil spirit of God came upon Saul, David would take the lyre and play it. Saul would find relief and feel better, and the evil spirit would leave him.
Okay, so we have this loving relationship, this wonderful close relationship. Saul feels good about David. He's got him around every time. And whatever this was, maybe he had headaches. Maybe he had these severe headaches. We don't know what the evil spirit means, but clearly it was something that plagued him. Maybe it was epilepsy. I mean, we know schizophrenia could have been any number of things, but something about the music soothed him, made him calm, and maybe allowed it to pass, whatever that moment was, and he had a special feeling for David. So because this story is going to take an abrupt turn, right? Those of us that know the story, but this is the part of the story we often don't read. I mean, we don't think about this part of it, this kind of early record of their relationship. If anybody has a question online, please let me know. Okay, let's go
The
on.
Philistines assembled their forces for battle. They massed at Soka of Judah and encamped at Ephes-Dammim, between Soka and Azekah. Saul and the men of Israel massed and encamped in the valley of Elah. They drew upon
You've all
their...
been there, by the way, if you've been to Israel. Because the tourist guys always tell you this is where the battle of Goliath and David took
Yeah.
place.
Wait, where
Valley
is
of
that?
Elah.
Where is it?
It's inland from Jerusalem.
Beit Shemesh, right?
It's near Beit Shemesh.
Yeah, it's where the winery.
There are
There's,
wineries. No, there are wineries
winery.
Oh,
everywhere.
it's where the Ella winery is. I know that one.
The Elah winery.
Kakadu.
Kakadu was there.
We know your priorities.
Okay.
Let's see, encamped in the valley of Elah. They drew up their line of battle against the Philistines. With the Philistines stationed on one hill and Israel stationed on the opposite hill, the ravine was between them. A champion of the Philistine forces stepped forward. His name was Goliath of Gath, and he was 6 cubits and a span tall. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he wore a breastplate of scaled armor, a bronze breastplate weighing 5,000 shekels.
He's a big guy.
Wow. He had bronze greaves, I don't know what that is, on his legs,
Like shin guards.
and a bronze javelin slung from his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's bar, and the iron head of his spear weighed 600 shekels. And the shield bearer marched in front of him.
Now, these might be exaggerations. They're
9 feet tall.
yeah, I mean, they're telling you this is a huge guy. This is they chose their biggest guy. He's not necessarily their fastest, but he's their biggest, strongest guy. And because his very size would intimidate, right? And that's kind of the whole point. This is more psychological at this point, is to bring this guy out and say, let's fight one-on-one. Here's our champion, give us your champion, and fight him, right? And you can see him, and you can see all the normal troops would be trembling, right? To see this kind of guy. I don't know who, I guess, it's not Muhammad Ali. It has to be somebody, who was just an overwhelming fighter.
He's that guy from the Chicago Bears.
In my family, football is taken over. I don't know what's happening. Okay, so we got,
Somebody else can read them.
anybody else want to read? They're all eating. You're reading. Go ahead. Who's reading? Mark, you wanna go?
He stopped and called out to the ranks of Israel, and he said to them, "Why should you come out and engage in battle? I am the Philistine champion, and you are Saul's servants. One of your men, choose one of your men, and let him come down against me. If he bests me in combat and kills me, we will become your slaves. But if I best him and kill him, you shall be our slaves and serve us."
Right, so this is kind of a, let's gamble the whole thing on a one-on-one. Which actually would be a more humane way to fight war. I mean, you have to admit you would lose, but, and accept it, and then only one person dies. And then it's over, you give back the territory, whatever, and you plan for another day. And then maybe you have another battle, right? You put out another champion. But of course, no one ever fought wars this way. It just never happened. And we didn't either when this happened, as you'll see. Probably know the story.
And the Philistine ended, "I hereby defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man and let's fight it out." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and terror-stricken. David was the son of a certain Ephrathite of Bethlehem in Judah, whose name was Jesse. He had 8 sons, and in the days of Saul, the man was already old. The 3 oldest sons of
Advanced
Jesse.
in years. So again, it's now introducing us to David,
Again,
right? Again, we're being introduced to David. This is at least the 3rd time that we've been introduced to him, right? In each one, he's a Bethlehemite. Jesse's the father, there are sons. They're reiterating this again. Now, a good editor would have taken some of this out. There was no reason if it was one story. But because the story came down this way, somebody who redacted it felt they had to leave it in. Or felt that this story needs to have this in it because this is a different story.
He was all those 3 things. He was a musician, he was a shepherd, he was a warrior, so.
It's a question of who knows it at that time. Why only certain people know and other people don't know. And why the stories, I mean, you think about it in the Torah, when it tells stories, with the exception of things like the creation myth, where it has 2, often it's one story, right? Here, we're getting a number of stories about David, and that will continue throughout all these chapters that we're reading, right? Okay.
the 3 oldest sons of Jesse had left and gone with Saul to the war. The names of his 3 sons who had gone to the war were Eliab, the firstborn, the next Aminadab, and the third Shammah. And David was the youngest. The 3 oldest had followed Saul, and David would go back and forth from attending on Saul to shepherd his father's flock at Bethlehem.
Now, again, you can see that someone put that in there to try and reconcile these stories, right? Because if David's a warrior and known as a warrior, why is he not one of the sons who's in battle, right? If that's what he's known as, and not as a shepherd, if at court they already know he's a warrior, well, he should be there with his brothers, right? But they need to kind of reconcile the fact that Samuel finds him as a shepherd, and the last story got a statement that he was out with the shepherd, and they had to go get him to play the lyre, right? And now this story is going to do the same thing. It's going to tell us, well, we got to send for, David's back there with the sheep again. He keeps going back to the sheep. Okay.
How far were the sheep?
Well, Bethlehem. You know where Bethlehem is in Jerusalem? So, well, where Ella is, so Beit Shemesh, it would have been, in those days, it would have been a good, I would imagine, at least a day's ride. If they were riding, if they were walking 2 days or 3, it's and it's hill country. It's not flat country. Yeah.
The Philistine stepped forward morning and evening and took his stand for 40 days. Jesse said to his son David, take an ephah of this parched corn and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers, and carry them quickly to your brothers in camp.
You know, this is like we're feeding the soldiers in Israel now, right? People are feeding their soldiers. Well, you want to give them home cooked meal, and so they're giving them, he's saying, take all the food to your brothers who are fighting, and let them have some good food. Because I don't know what they're giving them there on the front lines. You know, some kind of K-rations, knish, kugel. It's an old joke. It is an old joke. I didn't make it up. Okay.
Take these 10 cheeses to the captain of their 1,000. Find out how your brothers are and bring some token from them.
Okay, why the cheeses to the captains? Yeah, take care of my boys.
Yeah.
You know, because the captain may not be eating all that well either. And getting some good cheese, he's gonna look favorably on Jesse's sons. Right? That's what you do. You pay off the captain to not put your boys in the front lines. Because the front lines are the place where they get mowed down. You want them to be a little further back.
Have you ever just hang out for 40 days? Sorry.
Yeah, 40 days, he's out there and they're like, well,
And nobody's doing anything.
no, you could think they're strategizing, how should we approach this? You could think of the war council, they're not just sitting there. Saul and his captains are obviously trying to figure out, how do we answer this? Do we answer it? Do we go around it? Do we attack from behind? What is our best strategy here? We don't know what the weather was, right? We don't know if it was a time of year when they were waiting for the weather to break. And we don't know what was going on, but they were clearly, you gotta believe, the leadership was trying to figure out, how do we deal with this tactic? Can we beat the Philistines head on? If we can't, should we think about doing something here, maybe sending a champion out? If not, are there other approaches? Should we withdraw? Right? Should we try to bribe the troops?
Kind of like any military strategy.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta figure, but he's humiliating the troops. He's out there humiliating Saul and the troops. While all of this is going on, their tactic is send out Goliath and let him humiliate them. That's their tactic. Okay.
Saul and the brothers and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah in the war against the Philistines. Early next morning, David left someone in charge of the flock, took the provisions, and set out as his father Jesse had instructed. He reached the barricade as the army was going out to the battle line, shouting the war cry.
Wait. The army is shouting the war cry. So where are they? There are barricades and they're shouting the war cry. So you have to sort of imagine, if you've seen Braveheart.
Oh, yeah.
You remember Braveheart? They're beating their things and they're yelling out loud, the whole group. You have to kind of imagine there's a barricade, they've set up a barricade. That's their defense. And they're all shouting out there, their kind of war cry. Because that's kind of what you do. Sort of like, a football team getting psyched up and shouting out, out loud. Or the Maori, if you've seen the Maori, when they do their war dance. There was this wonderful clip of a young woman in New Zealand in the parliament, some of you may have seen it, who was protesting against trying to change a treaty, a 200-year-old treaty with Aborigine or Maori. And she went into the Maori war
Just
dance.
last week, right?
I saw this morning. And the other few Maori that were in the council joined her in it. And it's that kind of thing. That's what you did in a war setting. So you imagine that's what's happening out there.
So it was both armies or just Saul's army?
We don't know. We only know what it tells us, but we can imagine that both armies were kind of in it. And then in the middle was Goliath. They're set on two mountaintops. Goliath is in the valley saying, come and get me, I'm here. Send your guy out. Right? And that's what's set up for this battle.
Sorry, can you tell me what number we're on?
We are on page 6,
Yeah,
page 6, and we are in the English on verse 21.
21.
I thought of the sharks and the jets. Taunting each other.
Yeah, there is a taunt, yeah,
Who was in the middle?
right, there is, well, yeah, Tony was in the middle of that story, and unfortunately didn't affect the right change, but anyway, or else the story wouldn't have happened. You had to have him killed. Biff? No, it wasn't Biff, it was,
Riff.
Riff. Okay, 21.
Israel and the Philistines drew up their battle lines opposite each other. David left his baggage with the man in charge of the baggage and ran toward the battle line and went to greet his brothers. While he was talking to them, the champion, whose name was Goliath, the Philistine of Gath, stepped forward from the Philistine ranks and spoke the same words as before. And David heard it.
Really? We got introduced to Goliath again? Right? Wouldn't you have edited that out at least? I mean, we just heard who Goliath was. We know the whole story. So I'm trying to get you to understand this is kind of a mishmash of a lot of different pieces. And somebody at some point, the theory that many scholars have is somewhere in the 6th century or so, or 7th century, somewhere in there at the court in Jerusalem, the scribes were editing all this source material that they had received orally and some of it in writing. And they were trying to put it together into a form that would eventually be the Tanakh. That includes the Torah, the pieces of the Torah, pieces of all these other books, Joshua, Judges, Samuel. You know, they're trying to take their ancient history and put it in a form and write it out so that they could pass it on, because writing had now become a major part of the court. They had scribes.
Was that after the return, the destruction of the first temple and the return from Babylon?
It would have been around the same kind of time, a little before it, and then it would continue in the courts after. Because scribal traditions were developing at that time, right? And here you can actually see it. It's harder, you have to, a scholar study it in the Torah. It's harder to see it there. You have to really look at the Hebrew language. But here you can even see, just in the flow of things, a lot of this stuff seems redundant and just doesn't, if someone were writing the story, there would be no reason to keep reintroducing the same characters.
But if every word in the Torah is there for a reason.
Torah,
But this is not Torah.
Oh, okay.
right? This is Tanakh.
This
We're
is
now
Tanakh.
in Samuel.
Okay, I was gonna say it's all foreshadowing, but yes,
It all is holy,
yes.
but the book of, the 5 books that we call the Torah, the theories about that is that that is holy. Some theories are that it is actually one long name of God. Therefore, every letter needs to be written exactly as it is. Otherwise, you mess up the name of God. Or that each letter is your letter as a Jew. And therefore, if you mess that letter up, you're not there, and so it's not whole. I mean, there are a lot of theories about it, but the theory is that is holy, and that is sacrosanct. Scholars don't say that. But the theory, the Orthodox traditional theory of Judaism is that. The rest of it, as you can see, the Hebrew is uncertain in a lot of parts, and it's subject to change and interpretation. Okay. Let's get to the battle. David heard him. We're on 24.
When the men of Israel saw the man, they fled in terror. And the men of Israel were saying among themselves, "Did you see that man coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The man who kills him will be rewarded by the king with great riches. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and grant exemption to his father's house in Israel."
How do they know that? We didn't know that until now. Right? We've been reading the story. Nothing said that Saul made this deal. Well, so what was going on during those 40 days? One thing that was going on was we need someone to go out there. So Maybe it started with, we'll give you a reward. We'll give you this, we'll give you my daughter, we'll give you, and it became bigger every day, every week. Maybe they added to it in order to try and entice someone, and no one was going.
Negotiations, you have to like sleep in the box over that.
Yeah, well,
I
they
mean,
thought
I
that
can-
might do it, and apparently
Right, I'm just
it,
saying,
it
Jeremy,
spoke to our young man.
I just think it's very typical of what happens.
Well, and it speaks to, the fact that it spoke to David tells you something about David and his own ambition. He's the eighth child. He's the last. His father barely even remembered he was out in the fields. If you remember our earlier story with Samuel, he has, these are my sons. And he says, don't you have another one? And he goes, oh yeah, David. He's out with the flock. It's almost like he's an afterthought. So who is the most ambitious, right? The one who needs to be seen because no one sees him.
It's not recognized.
He wants to get ahead. This is a good deal. He's willing to risk his life, right? And if he's a warrior, and maybe he was or wasn't, but whatever he is, he's confident. We know that. We're going to learn that about him because he's willing to volunteer. And then we're going to see how confident he is, because he will do something that's extraordinary in this process, not just the killing. That is extraordinary, but even more, I think. Okay.
Did Jonathan know, had they met at this point in
Not
the
a
story?
We've read the story, no. Nobody has met, I mean, except in the story of Jonathan. We know that Saul, in that other story, Saul knows who David is in the other story, because he's playing the liar for him. And then you got to believe Jonathan knows who David is, right? Jonathan's at court with his father. Michal's at court with her father. They must know who this liar player is, right, at court. But this is a different story. This story, nobody knows David. David is brand new. He's just shown up with food for his brothers. And he hears about Goliath. And now we'll see what happens. Somebody else want to read?
I can read right now. What
Okay.
number?
We are on 26.
David asked the men standing near him, what will be done for the man who kills the Philistine and removes the disgrace from Israel? Who is that uncircumcised Philistine that he dares defy the ranks of the living God? The troops told him in the same words what would be done for the man who killed him. When Eliab, his oldest brother, heard him speaking to the men, Eliab became angry with David and said, why did you come down here, and with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your impudence and your impertinence. You came down to watch the fighting.
Okay, so the brother doesn't have such a high opinion of David, right? He's, his view is this kid is constantly sticking his nose where he shouldn't. And why did you come down here anyway? What are you doing here? What, you should be with the sheep. That's your job. Your job is to take care of those few sheep. Right?
Yeah.
Not a great relationship with the oldest.
I was a little bit jealous that he was picked already.
Well, yeah, but again, that's a different story. If you believe those stories all happened in the way it says that, yes, the brothers should have known that he was the chosen one. He's Harry Potter.
It sounds so much like Joseph and his brothers, the same kind
Yeah.
of,
Well, yeah,
the baby
Good.
brother and.
Cain
it's like all the brothers.
Yeah.
It's
Dysfunctional.
Ishmael, right? Isaac, it's all of them.
About Cain and
It's
Abel.
all the brothers, yeah, it's all of them.
Yeah.
Esau, Jacob, it's all, or even with sisters, but only with
The
Rachel
youngest
and
is-
Leah.
The youngest is favored.
And in this case, it doesn't seem that Jesse saw David as his favorite. Unless he was protecting him for some reason and wanted him not to be chosen. Could have been. Okay,
Interesting.
all right.
But David replied, what have I done now? I was only asking.
So, what did I do now? You're always hocking on me, but I'm always doing something. I didn't do anything, I just asked a question. Okay.
and he turns away from him towards someone else. He asked the same question, and the troops gave him the same answer as before. The things David said were overheard and were reported to Saul, who had him brought over. David said to Saul, "Let no man's courage fail him. Your servant will go and fight that Philistine."
Okay, so the kid, his brother says, just shut up and get out of here. And David goes to another soldier, asks the same question, says the same thing. What is he saying? He says, no one's going to stand up to this guy and defend God and our people? I mean, he's saying, I'm here. And when his brother shuts him down, he goes to another one, and he goes to another one. So much so that it gets reported to the big cheese. Saul, the king, hears about this guy who's making noise that he'll fight. And David then says it right to the king. Think about this. This little kid, 8th in line of his father, tending sheep, who is suddenly on the front lines, is now in the presence of the king of Israel, the first king of Israel. And he tells the king, send me, I'll do it.
That's a lot of chutzpah.
That's chutzpah. That is chutzpah. That is, this kid has incredible confidence in himself. Yeah.
I was just gonna start singing.
Yeah.
What are you gonna sing?
I'm waiting for something.
Something from
Not
the play?
today.
Yeah.
Not today. Okay, how we doing? You guys still have time? He's got company. All right, let's go on.
But Saul said to David, "You cannot go to that Philistine and fight him. You're only a boy, and he has been a warrior from his youth." David replied to Saul, "Your servant has been tending his father's sheep, and if a lion or a bear came and carried off an animal from the flock, I would go after it and fight it and rescue it from its mouth. And if it attacked me, I would seize it by the beard and strike it down and kill it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and that uncircumcised Philistine shall end up like one of them, for he has defied the ranks of the living
Look
God."
at this chutzpah, this kid. I mean, and also his confidence
He knows
and his
own
sense. Did he kill a lion and a bear?
We don't.
Yeah.
We don't know. But he certainly has that story, and it's him. It's how he sees himself.
Yeah.
Maybe he did kill a lion. Maybe he did kill a bear. There were lions and tigers and bears in Israel at the time. Oh my, at the time. They've all mostly gone now because of the changes in the environment. But we have stories. We had Samson also, and we have stories with various animals. But just listen to those words that he's saying to the king. Imagine this young guy goes to the King of England or to Queen Elizabeth I and speaks this way. This is incredibly
You can also get your head cut off.
good. Yeah. And now, of course, for Saul, here's an out. He finally has someone who's willing to go, and he figures the kid's going to die, and maybe they're going to use that moment to attack. Maybe he's got a tactic. Maybe he's figuring, I just need something to distract my boys, the troops, from this giant, something. And maybe this will do it. And maybe we can use the distraction to sneak around to the sides and attack from the sides. I mean, I don't know what he's thinking, but I know he's a warrior, Saul. And he must be thinking about what's the move after this if I send this kid in there. Because he makes the decision to send the kid in. You didn't have to. He could say, look, I appreciate it. You're a wonderful young man, but thank you very much. But no, thank you. Yeah, go get, the liar would be a different, if he knew that he played the liar, which he doesn't seem to know at this story. Okay.
"The Lord," David went on, "who saved me from lion and bear, will also save me from the Philistine." "Then go," Saul said to David, "and may the Lord be with you." Saul clothed David in his own garment. He placed a bronze helmet on his head and fastened a breastplate, because a breastplate was combined with a breastplate on it. David girded his sword over his garment. Then he tried to walk, but he was not used to it. And David said to Saul, "I cannot walk in these, for I'm not used to them." So David took them off.
Okay. So Saul, first of all, you gotta say, this is a funny scene. If you're actually visualizing the scene.
Yeah.
Remember who Saul is.
Big
Remember
guy.
how big he is. He's a big guy. David is not. And he gives him his armor. Totally inappropriate. It's like a clown suit. You know, on this little guy, and his sword is a huge sword, and the helmet is too big, so it's coming over his face. And he can't walk. He tries to walk in it. I can't walk in this. Right? It's kind of a funny scene. And so David takes it all off.
More husband.
Yeah, he refuses the armor of his king.
Yeah.
And he gives up the sword. He's gonna say, I gotta do this Frank Sinatra's way,
My way.
right? It's my way or the highway. There's no other way I'm going out there. It's my way. Just as I've always done with the weapons I'm used to and I'm good at. Okay.
He took his stick, picked 5 smooth stones from the wadi, put them in his pocket of his shepherd's bag, and sling in hand, he went towards the Philistine. The Philistine, meanwhile, was coming closer to David, preceded by his shield bearer. When the Philistine caught sight of David, he scorned him, for he was but a boy, ruddy and handsome.
Right, so again, ruddy and handsome, so we got, again, we had a little description, he's a handsome kid. We know that, it's the 4th time we've been told he's handsome, and it's at least the 2nd time or 3rd that we've been told that he's reddish.
And the Philistine called out to David, Am I a dog that you come against me with sticks? The Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, Come here, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field. David replied to the Philistine, You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the ranks of Israel, whom you have defied. This very day the Lord will deliver you into my hands. I will kill you and cut off your head, and I will give
the carcasses
of the Philistine camp to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the earth. All the earth shall know that there is a God
in Israel.
in Israel.
Okay, quite a speech, right? Well, if we believe, first of all, if we believe David wrote some of the Psalms and is a musician and obviously an accomplished warrior, and he will be a very accomplished administrator of the United Kingdom. We know that later. He will put together a government of the Jewish people that holds it together for about 80 years. And that's no small task, as we've seen in Israel today. Taking a country of Jews and holding them together, and David will set up the process to make that happen. So he's very smart, he's very savvy. He could have said this, could have been this articulate, but they certainly, whoever was putting this together, saw him that way. This is the David, they had inherited the Psalms, and they were ascribed to David. Psalms were from the temple period, so they already knew of these Psalms, and they knew of a lot of these stories. So David is this bigger than life character to whoever's putting this together as well. And so this speech would have made sense, and maybe he did say it this way, or maybe someone along the way embellished the story and made this kind of passionate statement for David to say to Goliath. He's basically saying, I'm going to kill you, cut off your head, and feed the flesh of all your troops to the birds, and doing it for the God of Israel, and you disgrace. I mean, it's quite a speech. It's kind of Henry V. Shakespeare.
Better than Taylor Swift.
Better than Taylor Swift.
Or he's creating with his words.
Be careful. There are a lot of Swifties around. Okay. All right. Any questions about any of this so far? Are you enjoying David?
Yeah.
These stories?
Yes.
It's better. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Someone asked me the question, why did I choose him?
I've been holding it since the last class.
How could you not choose this guy?
Exactly.
I mean, who? And he's such a super figure later you know, there's so many stories about him that are so rich with different ideas of who his character is and who he becomes. Because once we get to the latter parts and we see him as a father and as a king, we'll see other parts of him that are even more complex as those come out. And that will play as into what we're learning about him as the number 8th son, and the kid who needs to be seen and who has chutzpah and who has confidence. We'll see him a very different person later as time will play on him.
May I ask it now, since you're in the middle of this discussion?
No, but next time maybe you can ask it.
Oh. I can't hold it anymore. I'll
Yes,
be
you
quick.
can.
I'll be quick. So my question actually was, which is exactly what you're talking about, that I raised at the last question. What all was it that inspired, I know it's a general overall, that inspired you for all of the reasons that you're talking about, to do the research, the study, the play, all of these things together, that what particularly spoke to you, besides all of the above?
You just answered it.
It's David. It's who David, it's the stories of David that did it. You know, he, just like he says that you know, God saw in David something, that's how I felt. He was a genuine human being. We don't even know if David lived. You understand, I told you at the beginning, we have no physical evidence that proves that there was a King David. And that most modern archaeologists and scholars believe if he existed, he was a small town, little petty king of tribes, a tribal king, and never really had a major empire of any kind or a big country or big area. That's what they're thinking now. But that's not our David. That's not the story that is here or the story that I inherited as a Jew. And that story speaks to me of a complex, complicated, conflicted human being that is real, whether he existed or not. This David is real to me. And I think and he's a musician. So to write a musical, why would you not?
Yeah.
Right.
You know, why would you not? You don't have to add any layers to him. You just have to pick the ones that you want to use.
Which was.
In fact, that's what we
hard
did,
part.
because we had many iterations, and I think we didn't quite get there. I would like to do it again, because I have ideas of how we could reshape it. But for that, I need someone to pay for it, and we don't have that yet. So do we have any more time? A little more, you guys, a few more minutes?
Yes.
Well, we're not gonna finish it, we got 4 more sessions. Okay, let's get it, let him kill
And the
it.
whole assembly shall know that the Lord can give victory without sword or spears. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will deliver you into our hands. When the Philistine began to advance toward him again, David quickly ran up to the battle line to face the Philistine. David put his hand into the bag, he took out a stone and slung it. It struck the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. Thus David bested the Philistine with sling and stone. He struck him down and killed him. David had no sword. So David ran up and stood over the Philistine, grabbed his sword, and pulled it from his sheath, and with it he dispatched him and cut off his head.
Look at that. So, I mean, you know, he took one stone. They are lethal weapons if you hit exactly in the right spot. He obviously knocked him, he wasn't dead, probably unconscious at that moment, probably had a pretty bad concussion. He's down on the ground. David runs up, takes the sword out of Goliath's sheath, this huge sword, lifts it up and brings it down on his head, cuts his head up. And then, of course, the famous scene of David holding the head up to the Philistines. And now we see what happens after the battle.
When the Philistines saw that their warrior was dead, they ran. The men of Israel and Judah rose up with a war cry, and they pursued the Philistines all the way to Gath, and up the gates of Ekron. The Philistines fell mortally wounded along the road to Sharim, up to Gath and Ekron.
Okay, so at the end of it is pretty quick, happens pretty quickly. But what happens is they see that Goliath's dead. David had shaped this as a battle of God against Goliath, the God of Israel. And he made that's that speech. He made it very clear that God is going to kill you. God has given me this victory, and God will do it without a sword. God's going to do it real simply. Simple. A shepherd is going to defeat you, and that will show that
And
it's
that's what
God.
happened.
And therefore, when it happened, the troops of the Philistines were shattered. Their confidence was gone. They believed they were going against a God that could do this, and they ran. And then the troops of the Hebrews of Israel, they went after them and started slaughtering them. Because now you're just cleaning up after them as they've left. You know, if you remember it in the 6-Day War, one of the things they said is the Egyptians left their shoes in the sand and their weapons, and they ran back to Egypt. Didn't happen in 73, but it happened in 67. And if you imagine, that was kind of what these Philistines did. They basically just dropped whatever they had and they ran. Well, they went after them and they just slaughtered them. And they went to their cities and they slaughtered their cities. So they had a great victory. They didn't destroy the Philistines, because the Philistines are going to remain a power until David ultimately destroys them as king, when he's king. But they have this great victory, and that's David's moment that everyone remembers. So we've now seen the actual story as it was written here in all of its complexity, but we've also seen at least 2 other stories about Samuel anointing and about David and the lyre and Saul being his armor bearer. So we've now had 3 stories of Saul or us being introduced to David. And we now know that Saul has promised the killer of Goliath his daughter's hand in marriage and other rewards. So we'll see how that plays out next time.
Next time.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you.